One decision, that's kind of where we've been left with. You're one decision away from a radically and totally different life. Or maybe you've made one decision that you've given up on something or someone too soon. One decision. I think so often, especially in kind of today's, I don't even know, not even culture, but today's world, we get so caught up in the chaos of normalcy. The chaos of normalcy, the chaos of bearing the weight of this world all on our shoulders, bearing every single thing and struggle and burden that we can imagine on our shoulders. And we get to a point where we just try to hold on to it. We try to carry it. We get caught up in the chaos of it. And I think as part of that, we forget that we have access to the living, breathing, present God of the universe, but yet maybe we lose sight. Maybe we push him away. Maybe we intentionally keep him at a distance because it's just a little bit easier. Or maybe it's more convenient for us. We've been in this kind of interesting time, and a few weeks ago I asked the question of, are we going to exit this quarantine, exit this stay-at-home type of thing the same way we entered it? Are we going to exit it with our faith in the same exact spot, or are we going to exit it with a relationship with the living, breathing, present God that is more deep and healthy and cultivated like never before? One decision. One decision. And for some of us, I think that decision, we have to allow ourselves to actually start to just process some stuff. Recently, I remember having some different conversations, and one of those conversations was with somebody about the different types of people in the world. And I'm sure you guys can relate with this, where there's different types of people. There's some people who can just live very well in the present times. They're here, they're present, they're active in the present, and then there's others who are more I don't even know how to say it, but they live in the past. They dwell in the past with things that have happened to them or things they've done, and they can't release that. But some of us look ahead to the future, dream what it can be, see what it can be, what it can look like, and feel like we get energy from that. And while some of us can do that, there's a struggle with the other two of the present and the past of we struggle to rather just be in the moment maybe, or maybe to release our past. You see, I'm one of the people who I like to think about the future. I'm very kind of dwelling in the future. I enjoy dreaming. What could things look like? What could it feel like? What would things sound like in the future? What could happen after all of this? And the hard part for me sometimes is that I forget they're still a present. They're still today. When I dream, sometimes I can lose sight of here and now, or I can forget about the past and the things that we've done before, the things that I've walked in before, because I get so caught up in the future. And I think that for the most part, we each operate in one of these, either past, present, or future. And I think it's important to remember that and to know that, because we can all see and get to the same spot, but for each and every one of us, it just looks and feels, and it might just seem a little bit different. It reminds me in some ways of our faith journey. Some of us get so caught up with, oh man, my past, God just is doing something in my past and he's forgave me for my past, but I can't release it. And there's others of us who are just so in the present right now of, yes, like I'm here, I'm doing this, and I'm trying not to do this, I'm trying not to. But I think there's also some of us who look in the future and say, well, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. And we can all get to the same spot. That's our goal, right? We want to be in the presence of God. We want to be with him in heaven. Our journey just looks different. It reminds me of a few different trips that actually Courtney and I have taken. We took our honeymoon in Tennessee, and then we've also had the opportunity to, before our boys, to take a trip to Colorado and also in California. And in some of those times and trips, we did a lot of hiking. On our honeymoon, we would hike through these woods and find these waterfalls and try to climb up them. And not knowing what's behind them. There was one waterfall in Tennessee where I remember climbing up this waterfall, and we got done, and we go into town to get lunch, and we were talking all about this waterfall that we came across and everything. And the guy started laughing at the store that we were at because he pointed to these wallets and keychains and purses and stuff that were actually made from a rattlesnake skin. And he laughed and he said, that waterfall actually is a known den for rattlesnakes. And I'm like, awesome. So those signs that said, beware rattlesnakes, they're legit. Or in Colorado, as we were hiking and we started at the bottom and we were trekking, and you kind of wound all the way up to this point, and we get to the top and we can overlook and see everything. I remember those journeys, those times traveling and hiking. I remember we'd get there and we'd be just about to start up, and we'd make sure we have everything. Are your shoes tied? Do you have maybe a jacket or a light coat or a long sleeve? And as you get higher, it gets colder. Do you have water? Do you have a snack? Are we ready? And we take off. What's interesting is as you hike or as you go up, there's actually many different ways a lot of times to go up to the top. You can ride a bike. You can hike the trails like what we did. You could even drive. And in some cases, there were these almost little ski lifts that took you all the way from the bottom to the top. There's all these different ways that you could get there. But here's what's so intriguing to me is that when you hiked it, when you walked in those woods, when you had to figure out the best way to get up these rocks, you had to see it and understand that journey. And you got to see the beauty. You got to understand and know the journey better than those who would just simply drive from the bottom to the top or ride from the bottom to the top. You understand it at a deeper level. And then when you get to the top, you can stand up there. You can stand up at the top and you can look over everything, and you can even see kind of where you went and where you came from. And as you do that, you know the depth of beauty of being on top. You know the value in being where you stand because you walked through some puddles and some tall grasses. You had to walk through some thorn bushes maybe. You got some scrapes and some bruises. You might be bleeding even, but you made it. You made it. You made it through the struggles, and you grew. You grew in your ability to get to the top. You grew in your ability to make it. And here's the truth is, I think we can all talk about the top. Driving up it, riding up it, or walking up it. You can talk about the top when you get there, but for some of us, we never knew the walk. I think it's the same with our faith sometimes, that people might know God, but they never want to walk with him, to discover him and his journey with them. We can talk all we want about knowing God and his goodness and his faithfulness and all these things, but when it comes time to actually walk with him and everything, we start to get shy and we push it away. Why? Because that means we might get messy. We might get hurt. We might get bruised or scraped up. But we want to talk about it, right? But I think sometimes we get caught up in just wanting to talk and not walking. We've said it before, and this is a very, very important truth for us in today's culture, and I think a timely truth is there's a big difference between knowing about God and knowing God, right? There's a big difference in knowing about God and who he is and actually knowing God personally and deeply. Knowing and having a true relationship with him, a deep relationship with him. In James chapter 1, it says this, verses 22 through 25. But don't just listen to God's word. Don't just listen to God's word. You must do what it says. Otherwise, you're only fooling yourselves. See, for if you listen to the word and don't obey it, it is like glancing at your face in the mirror. You see yourself, walk away, and then forget what you look like. But if you look carefully into a perfect law that sets you free, and if you do what it says and don't forget what you heard, God will bless you for doing it. I think there's so much richness in those few verses there. There's so much goodness in that. And it leads me to this idea and this thought of what happens when we get, right, to the end day and we stand before God. What does he say to us? What are we hoping is that we want him to say, well done, my good and faithful servant. Well done, you've done well. You heard my truth and you walked in my truth. You heard my truth and you preached my truth. You lived my truth. Well done. God will say, well done and faithful. He's not going to say well thought or good intentions. He's going to say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And I think when James is speaking here, there's this sense of him calling out those who just scrutinized or just studied the word but never did what it said. Those similar Pharisees and high priests of those days with Jesus that knew the word but didn't act in the word, or knew the truth but didn't really live in the truth. It's the same for us today. We can know this, and we need to know this. We need to have the knowledge of this, but we also need to have the actual living, breathing lifestyle of this too. We need to know what God says for us, but we need to live it out too. How are we living and breathing and doing what God has told us to do? Like those high priests, those people back in Jesus' day, they knew the words essentially, but they didn't know the word. John 1, right? Like in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. Jesus was there in the beginning. They knew the words, but they didn't really know the word, Jesus. What about us? Do we get just so caught up sometimes in knowing the words of this book, but not living that out? Last week, I kind of challenged us in that, right? I used the example of Simon Says, where when Simon tells us to touch our head, we touch our head, but when Jesus tells us to go and make disciples, we just memorize the verse and make it look good. Are we just memorizing words, or are we trying to live with what the word has told us to do? See, in order for us to do the job well done, we must know what is expected, and we must know what is needed to go and do so. And God laid that out for us clearly in his word. He gave us the perfect example in his son. So now that we know, we are responsible to go and do it. We know that we are responsible to go and make disciples. We know we are responsible to disciple our children. We know we are disciplers, or we know we are called to go into our communities, in our cities, in our nation, in our world. So we are now responsible to do it. What's interesting here is that in this Hebrew language, there's really no distinction between what knowing and doing is. If you know, you do, and if you do, you know. They're hand in hand. There's not much of a distinction between the two. So when he says you know the word, you must do the words. And I think it comes down to a simple thing of we can't be the hands and feet of Jesus if we just simply sit and don't move. We can't be the hands and feet of Jesus if we just don't simply get outside our own comfort zone. And I know we're in an interesting time right now, but I think that even for us in this time, church doesn't stop, and being the church doesn't stop. If anything, it should ramp up. See, the Spirit of God goes wherever you go. The Spirit is with you as you go, and you are in it as you abide in it. And as the Spirit goes with you wherever you go, you should bring that Spirit to the world. And I think for such a time as this, I think that also means in our digital world as well. We have this, we're able to watch church online right now, which is awesome. Praise be to God that we're able to do it and gather together still virtually. But what about Monday morning? Are we still showing the same Jesus to the people that we interact with on social media as what we encountered on Sunday morning 24 hours ago? Or are we very quick to judge and to tear people apart on social media because it's easy? Or are we showing them Christ's love, his mercy, his grace, the same as he has shown us? How do we show, demonstrate, and model what Christ would have preached to the digital world here and now as well? Oftentimes, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I wonder what would his Instagram look like? Like, what would his Twitter look like? I picture Jesus sitting there, maybe, feeding the 5,000 and taking the Instagram, having everybody, hey guys, like, gather in, say cheese on 3, 1, 2, 3, and taking the picture and like posting of, what a great picnic today with 5,000 of my closest friends. You'd probably get 144,000 likes on it. What would his presence look like on social media, digital world today? And are we modeling that? You see, I think that we have to get to a place where we start understanding that Jesus didn't live and die just to keep us safe. He lived and died to send us and commission us out on a purpose. He brought us salvation. He brought us into his presence. And now we're able to experience that. But his life and his death and resurrection aren't there to just keep us safe. I don't think that was ever really the purpose. I think it was to show us that living with me and doing as I've told you is a dangerous task, but it's worth it. It's worth it. In Jesus, we ended with this truth that Jesus he wasn't a passive man, but he was passionate about his cause. He was passionate about what he was here for. There's a difference between just letting things happen in life and making things happen, achieving them, going after them. We can either sit back and let things happen in life, or you can go and actively seek God and his will in life. You can chase it and pursue it. So are you just sitting, waiting for things to happen in life, or are you actively participating in what God has called you to do? If God has called you to go and start up a Bible study, just because we're in lockdown sitting at home doesn't mean you can't start that Bible study up. If God is calling you to go and serve the least of these and provide meals or food or whatever it might be, just because we're in this situation right now doesn't mean that call is gone or lifted or by. Are you actively participating in God's will and desires for your life? This idea of you have a choice, right? To sit back and wait for something to happen, or to go and to work and to pursue and to make things happen, I think is a choice that we're faced with daily, if not every minute. It reminds me of, I'm watching a documentary right now. And maybe some of you guys are joining me in this. Every Sunday night, there's been these 2 episodes released of this documentary on one of the greatest basketball teams ever assembled, led by the greatest basketball player to ever play the game, Michael Jordan, the GOAT. My wife is thoroughly enjoying it. Actually, I force her to watch it with me. And I am thoroughly enjoying this documentary, but this guy, maybe most of us have heard of him, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is by far, I believe, the best basketball player to play the game. In a close second, if you ask me, is Isaiah Thomas. And these 2 guys, I think, had a mentality of they don't just play the game so that they don't lose, but they play the game to win. He never played to not lose. He played to win. And there's a difference. There's a difference. You see, playing to not lose is all I have to do is just barely enough to make sure I don't lose. But playing to win is I'm going to give 110% of the time. I'm going to go out and I'm going to give my very best. No matter what, no matter how much we're up, I'm going to go hard and I'm going to play to win. During one season, Michael Jordan injured his foot pretty badly. And here's the very interesting thing is Jordan was sidelined and he had to go through this physical rehab kind of thing to heal his foot. And so as part of that, he went back to his college and he was doing some exercises and he slowly built up. And so he was just playing a little bit of 1-on-1 for a little bit and then 2-on-2 and 3-on-3 and 4-on-4 and 5-on-5. And as he's doing all of that, his coaches actually didn't know. And he came back and he was like, Coach, I'm ready to go. And the coaching staff and medical staff put a strict time limit on Michael Jordan. He could only play 14 minutes per game. 14 minutes. Now, if you've played different sports, you know that it's really tough to just say, okay, you get 14 minutes, here's your time, go. And when it hits 14, he was done. He was out. They pulled him. It doesn't matter if there was 5 seconds left or 5 more minutes. 14 minutes was 14 minutes, and he was done after 14 minutes. And here what was so interesting to me is that during this strict time limit, Michael Jordan, he would go to play in some games the most critical, important minutes of those games strategically. So if it was a tough competition and they were, watching it, and maybe he'd go and play 5 minutes towards the end of the second quarter and just, okay, now we're about tied, and then third quarter comes and like, okay, we're down by 6. All right, Michael, you're going to go play 3 more minutes, so now you're up to 8, and then, okay, now the last quarter you're going to be able to play 6 minutes. Make the most of them. See, in those moments, Michael played the game to win, not to just not lose. He wanted to win at all costs. And he would win at any cost. He would win by, if he had the wrong shoes in his locker and he didn't have time to get the right ones, he would wear small shoes. His feet would be bleeding, but he'd still play to win. Play to win. Do we live with the same passion in this life that we are called to live in? And are we playing to win in this life, or are we just playing to not lose? I look back at this story in 1 Samuel 14. It's a crazy story when you really read about it and think about it. And it's a decision by this guy named Jonathan. And Jonathan is making this daring plan, and he comes to this point where Saul has all of his men camped on the outskirts, and Jonathan has to essentially take over this place. And in order to do so, though, he has to make a daring plan. And this is what it says, verses 6 through 13. This is what it says. Let's go across to the outpost of those pagans. This is the enemy. And he told this to his armor bearer. Perhaps the Lord will help us, for nothing can hinder the Lord. He can win a battle whether he has as many warriors or only a few. The armor bearer replies, do what you think is best. I'm with you completely, whatever you decide. Jonathan tells him, all right then, we will cross over and we will let them see us. And if they say to us, stay where you are or we will kill you, then we will stop and not go up to them. But if they say, Come on up and fight us, then we will go up. That will be the Lord's sign that he will help us to defeat them. If you're following along so far, Jonathan's battle plan does not make sense. But we're going to continue on. He continues on. When the Philistines saw them coming, they shouted, "Look, the Hebrews are crawling out of their holes." Then the men from the outpost shouted to Jonathan, "Come on up here, and we'll teach you a lesson." "Come on, climb right behind me," Jonathan said to his armor bearer, "for the Lord will help us defeat them." So they climbed up using both hands and feet, and the Philistines fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer, killed those who came behind them. Let's recap. Jonathan has this mentality of, I don't know the outcome, but God does. He has this mentality, and he says it, that perhaps, maybe, just maybe, God will act on our behalf. Read the story again, and we understand that Jonathan is trusting God's heart over his own heart. What if we risk in our own lives, what if we risk things and trust that perhaps, just perhaps, God will react and act on our behalf? What if we trust that God will actually do what he said he will do on our behalf? That God will show up in the middle of the pit and pull us out of the pit. That God will show up in the middle of the fight and demolish the enemy like he said he would. That God would redeem the brokenness and the pain like he said he would. Look at what Jonathan said here. That he basically said, if they call us up, we know God has done something. Jonathan, fighting a war, basically says this: I'm going to come up with the worst battle plan I can think of to show God's greatness in it. If they invite us to climb up, that means they're going to be on the high ground and we'd be on the low ground, and we'd have to climb up to them. I don't know about you. It's a lot easier to fight when you're on the high ground and they're coming up towards you. It's a lot easier to shoot an arrow or use a sword when somebody's coming from a lower point up at you. This battle plan doesn't make sense. It's a horrible battle plan. They'd have to climb up to them, meaning they give up the high ground, and they're looking directly in their enemy's face. And then, Jonathan says, we're going to trust God in it. We're going to just trust God. So Jonathan here believed that God could and would do the total madness and crazy thing that only he would be able to do. He had faith knowing that God is God and I am not, and I'm going to trust God in that. What if we have that similar faith, a similar faith that was all on God showing up and us trusting his heart in it? What if our faith was perhaps God is going to show up as he said he would? Perhaps God will do what he has said he was going to do. What could we see happen in our lives? What could we see happen in our world or our communities or our nation even? What if we prayed with the expectation that God is already doing and going before us? What if we prayed that God is already in the works of doing what we are about to ask? What if we expect and anticipate God to show up even in the impossible situations? I think it comes down to this idea of having courageous faith. I think that in order to do this sometimes, I think we just have to take a moment and maybe pause and have unbelievable, incredible boldness and courage and faith. A few years ago, there was a movie that was released called We Bought a Zoo, and maybe some of you have seen it. And in this movie, it's about this guy who knows absolutely nothing about zoos. And he buys this zoo, and he tries to save it. And in doing so, his boy, develops a crush and falls in love with this girl. Go figure, right? But this boy is scared that maybe, just maybe, she doesn't really know that he likes her. And he doesn't know how to act around her. And he doesn't know what to do. Then he gets this advice. And I love it, actually. What if you found 20 seconds worth of radical courage? What would you do with it? What if you discovered you had 20 seconds of radical, bold courage? What would you do with it? Later on in the movie, he remembers this advice in the pouring rain, and he visits the girl at her house, and he's about to leave, and he remembers the advice of 20 seconds, and he goes back, and he actually kisses the girl, and, they fall in love happily ever after or whatever. But that advice of what about 20 seconds? That 20 seconds sometimes is all you need of radical courage, radical faith. I often wonder how many seconds Peter walked on that water. At what point did Peter decide, I'm going to have 20 seconds maybe of radical faith and courage? Or David, when he stood before Goliath, at what point did he have this 20 seconds to load the rock in the sling and start twirling that thing? Or what about the woman on the side who saw Jesus passing by, who for the moment she just decided, I might have 20 seconds of radical courage to just touch his cloak? Or the lepers come to Jesus. Did they have to find 20 seconds of courage to come up and to ask him to do what only he could do? Or what about that Roman centurion to come before Jesus? See, history can change in 20 seconds. I believe that. History, everything can change in 20 seconds. Just ask the 12 young men who were called one day, and they decided, probably with 20 seconds or less, if they wanted to be a world changer with Jesus. Did they want to be his disciple? James and John, out in the boat with their dad. As Jesus calls out to them to come and follow him, it probably took them 20 seconds or less to jump out of that boat and follow him. What about Peter? What about Matthew? 20 seconds. 20 seconds may be all it takes to radically and courageously change how you have lived and thought in your life. 20 seconds. See, I believe that most of us are probably educated way beyond the level of our obedience. I believe that maybe most of us are educated to the point of we know what to do, but we might not walk in it always, myself included. And I believe that maybe, just maybe, we don't need more knowledge, and maybe perhaps we don't need to know more. But maybe, just maybe, we need to do more with what we know. We know what this says. We know the words, but maybe, just maybe, we need to start walking with the word hand in hand. So maybe I want to just ask you today, what if God is asking you something today, to do something in your life that may take 20 seconds of radical courage? 20 seconds of radical courage to put what you know into practice today. 20 seconds. What would you do with 20 seconds of radical courage? And how would you use it to put into practice what God has laid on your heart?